Okay, so tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in the disability community.
Well, actually, that's a pretty lengthy, circuitous journey for me. um, so initially, I really just got interested in kind of social justice issues early on in life based on my background and where I was living on the south side of Chicago, just really hyper socio politically aware. And um, I started college majoring in natural sciences and environmental, or what was it? Natural resources and environmental sciences. And I realized I wasn't interested in that during my freshman year. And I was really interested in more of like social justice issues. And I started canvassing. So going door to door, fundraising money for different organizations, nonprofits, like actually the Human Rights Campaign, um, and then Public Interest Group in California as well as Illinois. So I moved out to San Francisco at 19. And that's when it hit me that I was good at working with people, going up and speaking to, thousands of people and giving them a pitch in 30 seconds and trying to give them money, get them to give me money on the spot, this stranger on their doorstep. Um, and it just occurred to me, I'm very good at working with people and still with this social justice, drive. I was frustrated with just fundraising money for these sorts of campaigns. And I concluded, the only way to be able to get people to change their behavior is understanding how they think and operate. So I went back to school and I got interested in sociology without ever having taken a psychology course. So I was, majoring in that, hoping to do some sort of like, so help help the general public in certain, in some sort of way, like public health efforts, perhaps. And it wasn't until I took my first psychology course as an undergraduate that I realized that's what I wanted to be majoring in. That's how you learn how people work and what makes them tick. So I really, really loved psychology. I got involved in doing research as an undergraduate, and it was depression, anxiety type of research. And for me, it was like a wake up call that we knew so little about these mental health issues. Depression has been around for so long. I thought we knew what causes it and what's going on. And we didn't, or only to a certain degree, with some degree of certainty, and there's still a lot unknown. So I got interested in mental health research, and I didn't think I would be good at working as a therapist. I just actually thought I would be better as a researcher, even though I had people telling me, I really think that you should be working with people and, more in the trenches. And it wasn't until I started graduate school that maybe like my second year in that I realized, although I love learning and researching and critically thinking and having, discussions, philosophical, intellectual discussions, I don't enjoy doing actual, like writing of papers. And I would be better just working in the field, not going into research and academia. Um, and it was coupled with the experiences I was having as a therapy student, just the responses I was getting from, the patients I was working with, and I just seemed to be connecting well. And even in classroom settings where we were learning about therapy and doing role plays, I seemed to do really well. So, here I was, deciding to go into therapy and also working with low socioeconomic and more marginalized groups. I was working in community mental health centers, the VA, and that's my way that I can give back. I come from a privileged background, middle class, um, it, white background. And I've never wanted to use my education to make money, but to help others. And I've always been drawn to more marginalized groups in many ways, many instances throughout my life. But really just, I having grown up on the south side of Chicago, I can connect with others who've grown up, on the south side or the west side of Chicago. I cannot understand the experiences that they've had, by any means, but perhaps better than others. It's a really white dominated field, to be honest. And um, I do have familiarity. I've driven through these neighborhoods. I've walked through these neighborhoods. I've been, called white girl and all of these other things, jumped. But I keep going to those communities, and it means a lot to me to keep frequenting them and be a patron of them. So what does that have to do with disability, except that it's mental health in itself is a disability. And whether it's a full on, keeping you from working full time, or just, more of an interference that's interrupting your life, that it's still disabling, and stigmatized, very stigmatized. And I think that disability is very stigmatized, not just mental, but also physical. And yeah, I don't know. That was really circuitous, and I'm not sure if it answered uh, your
No,
question.
no, no, it's fine. Because let me just talk a little bit about your work in the mental health and disability area.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of what's that all about? What sorts of things do you focus on in your area of research? Um, because I understand you work a lot in neuropsychology and all these aspects, so could you elaborate on that?
Yes, absolutely. So I have done um, two externships in neuropsychology. So um, 2 years, 1 year for each externship. And um, although my future goal is to be a psychotherapist, a psychologist in a public hospital, I think it's very important to be a well-rounded clinician through getting neuropsychology experience as well. And I really just thought of that in the beginning, going into it and applying for it, because I didn't have to do an externship in neuropsychology at all. And it was once I got into it that I learned how important it is, and all of the different groups of individuals that you work with and help and identify what's going on, and how is it that we can either live with this or fix it. um, I did an externship at the VA working in the spinal cord injury unit. And that in itself was actually just a coincidence that, I applied for an externship as a therapist. And that was the unit that I ended up working on. And so I worked with individuals, with physical disabilities in a number of capacities, paraplegia, quadriplegia, MS. And, when I say that to people, they assume that what we were doing was working on like coping with their physical disability. But it wasn't. In some ways it was, but it was more so I was working with individuals who had, the same types of mental health issues that a lot of people have, anxiety and depression, and it was interfering with their life. And it was more just limitations in the typical therapy that we might give, that it needed to be tailored. Um, in certain ways, depending on the individual's mobility and their ability to participate in certain therapeutic techniques that we often do, such as like journaling or writing down your thoughts. If you're not able to do these things, then we have to find alternative ways to implement these interventions. And it yeah, and it also gave me a better understanding of just the basic aspects of living. You know, working with individuals for whom just getting ready for the day or taking a shower or using the bathroom is a process, or they can't do it independently, or it just takes so much longer than individuals who are completely physically abled. And it yeah, I feel like there's so much I could say about it. It it can be challenging to deal with, and at the same time it's the same sort of symptoms, like depression, anxiety. It's just everyone's different. And with that population, it can revolve around, just activities of daily living or independent activities of daily living that most people take for granted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, I get that. So, in terms of like neuropsychology, I also understand that you do certain assessments within that area. So, like, tell me a little bit about those, and I know this is a two-parter, but and how does those types of assessments really help people who are struggling with mental health, people with disabilities, to like help them get the resources they need to sort of get back on their feet, if they will, and like
Hmm.
navigate the course of their life.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And it's why I think neuropsychology is so important. What a neuropsychologist does is typically they're referred. A patient is referred from either their general practitioner, or maybe a general medical doctor in the ER, or their neurologist. They can be referred by anyone, really, a speech pathologist, and maybe they're having concerns about cognition. And that can be due to so many different factors. It can be due to stress. It can be, someone might be having difficulty concentrating and memory. And it can be due to depression, anxiety. It can be due to ADHD. So most people know what ADHD is. It can be due to physiological disorders, this whole wide range. And so, what a neuropsychologist does is get a full clinical interview. What is it that you're experiencing? For how long? We take medical history, family history, social history, educational history, employment history, everything, current symptoms, past symptoms, current difficulties. So, for example, if someone is coming in and they're having a lot of memory issues, and we're maybe suspecting some cognitive decline, dementia, or something to that effect, then we're asking very targeted questions. Are you losing just everyday items? Do you leave things on the stove? Those sorts of basic questions. Are you able to handle your own medications? Are you able to, pay your own bills? And then what we do after that is give individuals an intellectual assessment, so like an IQ test. And then we also assess for the entire range of neurocognitive domains, really cognitive domains. So we're looking at attention, processing speed, um, working memory, long-term memory, visuospatial abilities, visual memory, verbal abilities, language abilities, executive functioning, all of these different areas. And that allows us to understand what's going on with that individual. Based on the patterns of their scores on these tests, we can determine, we think this might be due to depression or anxiety, or we think this is ADHD or dementia, and we think it's cardiovascular, Alzheimer's, dementia. And that informs their treatment. It can inform their treatment, of course, based on the disorder, learning disability. All of these things are an intellectual disability. And so what a neuropsychologist does is take all of these findings from reports, and sometimes, from these assessments, and sometimes we get reports from family members or teachers when it's needed. And we'll compare all of this information combined with what we gathered in the clinical interview and provide a diagnostic impression and then recommendations. And for individuals with mental illness, sometimes it can be that we, recommend that this individual can only work part-time, or they're not able to work full-time, or they are able to work full-time, but they need certain accommodations in the workplace, such as, frequent breaks or a quiet, non-distracting environment. And we'll make these recommendations in our report that they would provide to their employer if they're looking for workplace accommodations, or if they're filing for, disability income, Social Security, SSDI, as treatment recommendations. Perhaps you should consult with a psychiatrist, or you should engage in psychotherapy. And we suspect that some of these symptoms will be alleviated. And if they're not, come back. Recommendations for family members as well, how to get involved or help when it's indicated. I know it was thorough.
Yeah, yeah, fair. It's good. Yeah, it's good enough. Yeah, I like that answer. So if I could just ask, what sort of stakeholders do you partner with in your efforts of, helping people with mental health, people with disabilities? Like you said, you work with a lot of professionals. Um,
Like neuros, or just, so I'm currently still a PhD clinical psychology student. And so my work has been through internships and externships, working under supervision of doctoral, clinical doctors, PsyDs and PhDs. And then also as a student, I conduct research. And that has been in collaboration with my research advisors. And for that, I've been mostly interested in anxiety and depression research. Recently submitted a paper about the trajectory of obsessive compulsive symptoms during childhood. And my current advisor, who I plan to be doing research work with, she is involved with community-based participatory research and individuals from marginalized or underserved communities, maybe is the better terminology for that, as well as advocacy, for individuals, seeking mental health, or even, physical challenges and mental health, rehabilitation. Um, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. So like if my last question here is, I know there's a lot of stigma with disability and also mental health in our society. So what I'm wondering is, how do you sort of mitigate that and like create a welcoming and inclusive environment for not only people with disabilities, but those struggling with mental illness?
That's a really great question. And the short answer is compassion and patience with individuals and where they're coming from, and not passing judgment for the experiences that people have and how they're perceived. I I very much do practice what I believe when I'm out and about. I do live in a neighborhood that is home to a lot of rehabilitation facilities for individuals with physical disabilities as well as mental health disabilities. So I'm very much um, embrace them when I'm out and about, and communicate, say hello, have a little chat or friendly conversation with them. And when I'm riding the CTA or the Chicago Transit, the L train, there tend to be a lot of individuals with mental health issues. So certainly trying to lead by example at times when everyone's looking at someone who might be speaking to themselves on the train. I just sit there and sit near them and try to normalize it for others, try to model that. And for me, I'll say twofold. I have not particularly held too much stigma. I can't say I haven't. It's very innate for us to kind of categorize people and um, use stereotypes. It is common for us to just kind of do. That's how our brain works. Um, But I grew up in a family that has a lot of mental illness, my family members, my aunt, my, other members. And so I kind of grew up with it and never really thought much about it. That was just my aunt. That's how she is. She has several disabilities and, vision impaired. Um, so it was kind of just always my reality. And I did learn that there is a lot of stigma towards individuals with schizophrenia. I didn't learn that until my mid-20s, after having already made friends with individuals who are homeless and no doubt had, psychosis or schizophrenia. Um, but also with research. I've recently gotten on board with stigma research because it has been shown that not just institutional or societal stigma towards an individual, but the stigma that an individual perceives who's living it can actually impede them seeking treatment, or even make their symptoms worse. Having this stigma, like, why do I have this? It's my fault, or something's really wrong with me, and that actually just compounds the mental and physical challenges that an individual seeks or faces, excuse me. And there's not much research supporting it. And the way it kind of works in the psychology field, at the very least, is you want to show it among different disorders. So it's been shown with schizophrenia, it's been shown with a few other disorders, but not with all of them. And so for my dissertation, I plan to fill a gap looking at stigma towards menstrual based symptoms. There's the whole joke of women getting PMS but there's some truth to it. What's going on? There's something hormonally going on that all these women, display all these symptoms. And for some, it's really severe. And so I'm interested in understanding how stigma towards that has shaped those individuals' experiences, symptoms, seeking treatment, and whatnot. Stigma is, it's quite a battle to face. And I will say it's been shown that there's a researcher who does a lot of this work at my university. And so I've learned a bit through what he does. And what he's shown is that just educating an individual about someone's condition, so paraplegia, or mental illness, whatever it may be, is not particularly effective at breaking stigmas. And really, it's meeting people who are with the lived experience, just meeting someone who's living with that disability helps to break the stigmas. And I mentioned before that I was doing canvassing work, and I really I loved seeing lobbyists, and the lobbyists that I was, fundraising the money to support their salaries. And I've always wanted to be a lobbyist and work at a public level. So, if possible, at some point, I would like to get involved with mental health advocacy groups and efforts, helping to ameliorate all this stigma that is present towards disabilities. And it'll take a lot of unified efforts across many fields and disciplines.
Yeah, it really requires a unified effort. But like you said earlier, when treating these individuals, like do it with compassion and like with empathy and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Oh, yes. Yes. And patience, just patience. With therapy, it's hard for people to change. It's hard for people to
Hmm.
change how they think and how they behave. And so a lot of times, what we're talking about in therapies is repetitive, and it might seem to be, oh, we keep talking about the same thing, but um, that's how change comes about. It's a process. And so being patient with where someone is, meeting them where they're at, is huge. And I think everyone is capable of patience and compassion. I think some have more than others. Um, but yeah, empathy as well. Empathy.
Hmm. Yeah, we can agree on that.
Good.